The first season of Megalobox took two major unconventional approaches when it comes to anime. First, it featured a classic animation style that required the viewer's patience to appreciate its beauty. Then it took the lightly treaded route of a story predicated on combat sports. However, the gritty animation aesthetic made Megalobox stick out from the pack of current-day anime trends, and upon further inspection, viewers would slowly realize that Megalobox was always intended to be so much more than a sports anime. Season 1 initially appeared as your typical underdog story, with Joe, Nambu, and Sachio being nobodies from the slums, going up against the corporate monolith of Yukiko Shirato and Yuri, aka the King of Kings. However, this underdog story quickly transitioned into a narrative about redemption, as Joe, Nambu, and Yuri displayed a lot of similarities throughout the show with the expectations of society and the shackles that bind them. In the end, the three men underwent converging character arcs that felt grounded within the dystopian world of Megalobox, while emphasizing a story that was never about winning the Megalonia and always about staying true to yourself. Fortunately, Season 2 of Megalobox didn't forget any of these core themes, and focuses on a narrative that is filled with redemption arcs and phenomenal world building. Despite the similarities, Season 2 is easily a step up in every aspect from Season 1, with expanded world lore, more grounded characters, and a unique narrative that integrates the triumph of new and returning characters over the bleak and dystopian aspects of reality. With that being said, let's see why Megalobox Nomad might become one of your favorite sports anime of all time. Roughly 7 years has passed since the conclusion of Joe's legendary victory at the finals of the first Megalonia tournament. In this span of time, Joe has burnt many bridges while becoming a shell of his former self, which leaves them struggling with a pill addiction while aimlessly wandering the city outskirts for the illusion of escape. During one of Joe's pit stops, he enters an underground Megalobox match against a man named Chief, and in the ensuing match, Joe manages to win despite being completely outclassed. Joe quickly realizes that the match was fixed, and confronts Chief by telling him he should be ashamed of himself for intentionally losing. However, Chief's motives are much deeper than Joe's initial understanding, and leads to a journey where Joe has to confront his past guilt, while looking to his new friend for guidance. Those who enjoyed the gritty narrative of the first season will be familiar with Megalobox Nomad's foundation. However, the overall tone of Season 2 shifts to a more serious narrative that places a larger emphasis on mental health. With Joe hitting rock bottom, we see a narrative that tackles concepts of guilt, addiction, and depression, while still delivering a redemption story that highlights human resilience over bleak circumstances. Because of this, Megalobox Nomad features a mature version of Joe that has to use empathy when interacting with people, and is a more grounded departure from the stubbornly aggressive Joe we saw in Season 1. Regardless, Megalobox is still Megalobox, which means there is no shortage of adrenaline-inducing fights and matches. Those who enjoyed the intense boxing sequences of Season 1 will find plenty of eye-catching fights here. However, the conditions of victory are less binary than Season 1, due to the more serious tone of Season 2, and subsequently raises the stakes of each fight, regardless of the stage they're performed on. On top of the fights, the established world building from Season 1 has also been further extrapolated in Season 2, and features a contemporary depiction of a dystopian world that is likely only a few decades ahead of reality. Because of this, Megalobox Nomad's world building manages to flesh out one of the most accurate depictions of a modern-day dystopia that's filled with real consequences and makes all the fantastical moments feel extremely grounded to the viewer. With minor aspects such as pill addictions leading to adverse health effects, all the way to extreme climate patterns leading to a refugee crisis and subsequent xenophobia in the city outskirts. And then there's the typical social inequalities and corrupt dealings that are to be expected of monolithic corporations sitting comfortably in the city center. However, it's the show's integration of various character struggles with the dystopian world building that does a nice job compartmentalizing the harsh aspects into our own reality. So, with that being said, let's talk about some of the notable characters of the show. Joe's victory at the first Megalonia was a dream realized for Team Nowhere, but it had a larger impact on the world that extended beyond Joe's legend and inspired many new characters of the show. First, we have Chief, who lives in an immigrant community far from the city outskirts. As a poor immigrant, Chief and his community experience heavy discrimination and harassment while facing the threat of losing their home to greedy landlords. Because of this, Chief's megaloboxing career is relegated to underground rings despite his genuine talent for the sport. However, none of these circumstances seem to discourage Chief, as he displays an extremely optimistic personality filled with charisma, while continuing to dream the dream that Joe showed him 7 years ago. Next we have Lou, who's the spitting image of Joe's youthful vigor, and like Chief, Joe's victory at the first Megalonia was an inspiration to Lou. This led Lou to seek out Yuri as his coach, and directly culminated in him winning the second Megalonia tournament, while eventually being dubbed the King of Kings. Behind Lou, we have Mac, who is the second-ranked Megalo Boxer of the world. Unlike Lou, Joe's victory at the first Megalonia humbled Mac as a boxer, which subsequently found himself unworthy of the ring and quitting the sport. However, dire circumstances in the last 7 years led to a paradigm shift with Mac, which saw him return to the sport in resurgent fashion. But just like Joe, Mac's arc is a struggle about staying true to yourself and redeeming past mistakes. Speaking of the past, Megalobox Nomad features no shortage of returning characters from Season 1, with some characters taking on a mentor position for Joe and the new characters of the show, while other characters have their arcs from Season 1 expanded upon and more fleshed out. Regardless of differing screen time, all the returning characters of Megalobox Nomad managed to have a huge impact on the storyline, while blending their development in a subtle manner that feels like a natural extension of the world lore. And just like Joe, Chief, and Mac, there's an expertly crafted form of catharsis in each returning character that makes the character development of Megalobox Nomad easily some of the best you'll ever see in any anime. Just like its predecessor, Megalobox Nomad features a nostalgic animation style that feels like a perfect fit for the gritty narrative of the show. However, expanded world building in Season 2 leads to more explored locations, which does a nice job to accentuate the consequences this dystopian world has wrought on the people. With dusty outposts weathered by poverty and climate change, juxtaposed by lavish boardroom meetings and fundraisers in the city center, Megalobox Nomad's animation style has never felt more appropriate for the narrative, while still being that gritty aesthetic you likely fell in love with in Season 1. On the other hand, the music has changed a bit in Season 2, with a smaller influence of hip-hop inspired tracks, replaced with more Hispanic inspired tracks in the city outposts and rundown immigrant camps, with the most notable changes in music coming from the newly introduced melancholic tracks of the show, which does a nice job highlighting the psyche and inner turmoil of different characters. Despite the changes, Season 2 still feels like Megalobox, with plenty of heavy beats that gets viewers hyped before fights, while adding a nice flow during matches. Yet, it's the diverse maturity in the soundtrack that coincides nicely with the tonally complex world, while still delivering a thematically consistent blend of narrative, animation, and music. Megalobox Nomad is a triumphant continuation from Season 1, but never a departure from the core elements that made it so memorable. Like its predecessor, Season 2 features high adrenaline combat on the surface, while presenting multiple redemption arcs integrated within the backdrop of a realistic dystopian world. And like any stable foundation, Megalobox Nomad expertly builds upon the base of Season 1 by featuring new characters that do a great job guiding the development of returning characters, while fleshing out the world lore and illuminating implicit functions that were always assumed in the socially stratified world of Season 1. As a result of these expansions, Season 2 feels like a story that's vastly matured from its core theme of redemption, with a natural evolution of multiple character arcs that develops into a cathartic storyline where the stakes are never as simple as defeating your opponent in the ring, and more about overcoming the internal struggles that directly and indirectly stem from the subjugation of a dystopian world. So, give Megalobox Nomad a go, as you'll quickly realize that Season 2 is so much more than a sports anime, as it blends grounded characters, gritty animation style, expansive world building, and a phenomenal soundtrack into a piece of art that can only be described as a masterpiece.